So here we are. We are in Parsha Vayetse, which he went out, and we've just read about Yaakov going out from his family. He's going to Lavan to stay with his mother's relatives, and he has this encounter on the way as he comes to Bethel, and he meets God for the first time. This is what it appears, right? And so we just had Grace and Bob read to us from the scroll. Do you have any thoughts on anything that we've covered already about what they just read? Bob.
Thank you. Well, it struck me very strangely that a shepherd would dream about a ladder. Why wouldn't he dream about herds of sheep?
Right.
There's a reason for that, I think, in that, number one, it's unique to Jacob, and because it's unique, it's got his attention. And once this strange episode begins in his dreaming, he begins to know that this is not of this world, because he would be dreaming of herds of sheep. He would be dreaming of sheep jumping over him so he could sleep, right? Count the sheep. So here he is counting the rungs on the ladder. It's for a real reason that I just said. And so it's unique. And this is where Jacob goes from head knowledge to heart knowledge. He realizes, because this is so different that and unique, that it's meant to alert him that he is close to our Creator.
Anybody else?
Yes, I want to mention that God, we know that he had a covenant with Abraham, right? And so now, I don't know if Abraham ever mentioned this to Isaac or his descendants or what, but God is confirming, and he is like, now he is telling Yaakov that this is the land that I promised. So he is confirming his promise to his people, his chosen people again. So that's awesome. Yeah. And that he is going to be with them, with him, and of course with them, and he will never leave him. That's a great promise, isn't it?
All right, so yes, we have God reiterating his promise. So this is actually where we encounter one of the names of God. There's a name of God, Hamakon, the place. And the idea is because Jacob stumbled into this place where God was, right? And that the idea with this name is that wherever we are, that God is our place, that he watches over us, that he houses us, he shelters us somehow, that as Yaakov is really fleeing for his life, God is with him. And he wasn't on his own. He says, surely God's in this place, and I didn't even know it, right? I didn't realize what was going on, and now my eyes have been opened to God's presence. And so this is where that name, the God is our place, right? Hamakon, the place, comes from. And so here we have, the other thing is, in verse 13, it says, my translation says, then suddenly Adonai was standing there next to him. Does anybody say something other than that? Verse 13. Okay. Yes, okay.
Above it.
On top. Is anybody is on top or above? Okay. Okay. So so this is this is a matter of perspective. So the word that is used here is both on and above or against, which would be like next to. And so in Genesis, the first few chapters, it talks about the seeds of the earth on the face of the ground, right? It's that same word. And so in Genesis, it says that the Spirit of the Lord God hovered over the surface of the deep, right? It's the same word. So he could be on or above, but here's the thing: is that as you know, Bob phrased it as he goes. This is where Yaakov goes from head knowledge to heart knowledge. This is where God's introducing himself. He's talking to Yaakov, and so the idea is that the angels are going up and down, meaning they're coming from earth to heaven and back, but God is coming down from heaven, and so God comes down and he's on the way I like to think of it, let's say it that way, is that he's on the ladder next to, or on the steps. It could be stairway as well, the same word for ladder and stairways. This is the only place in the Tanakh that this word is used, but it could be stairway. It doesn't need to be ladder. And so it's like God came down the steps to, he's still on the steps next to Yosef, talking to him and giving him this promise, right? Where he comes up to him. Yes, some translations do say next to him, beside him. Yes. So the idea is that Yaakov is getting a personal God, right? That he's with him in his distress, and he makes a promise. He says, he reiterates the promise to Abraham, right, in verse 14, and then 15 he says, "Look, I'm with you. I will guard you wherever you go, and I will bring you back into this land because I won't leave you until I have done what I have promised you." This was significant. I think there's often a question of, is God with me? Does God see me? Is he concerned for me? And here God is telling Jacob, 100%, I'm with you. And it's interesting to me that he says, I won't leave you until I've done what I've promised you, right? And so there's two things here. Does God leave Yaakov? And then, if so, when? Because is that promise the coming back into the land, or is the promise making his descendants as numerous as the grains of the sand on the earth? There's some ambiguity there. I hear, what was this? All of the above. All of the above. So then, okay, so let's say it's both, right? I'm giving you this covenant. I'm making this covenant with you. I made it with your grandfather, and I will guard you wherever you go and bring you back into this land. Why then would Jacob, when he's standing before Pharaoh, say that the days of his life have been few and evil? So when Jacob is standing before Pharaoh, Joseph introduces him. This is at the end of his life. He says, Pharaoh is looking at him at this aged man who must be wise and learned, especially to have fathered such a son as Yosef. And he says, tell me about yourself. And he says, few and evil have been the days of your servant, and they have not attained to the days of the life of my forefathers. And so, my question is, if God was with him through that entire time, and he could have been, I'm not saying that he wasn't, but I'm saying if God was with him the entire time, why then would he turn and tell Pharaoh, few and evil have been the days of my life? I'm not expecting this today. Okay, Joey? Lisa, right over there.
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is like, yeah, God's with us, but it doesn't mean life is easy. I mean, I could say, yeah, life has not been great. It's been kind of rough. It's been not so good.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean God's not with me, because there's no promise for my life to be super easy and always happy and always great and, always the mountaintops. So, I mean, Job had a lot of bad things happen to him, but God was still with him. There was no doubt about that. So, I don't know. I just look at all the people in the Bible. Not great things happened to them, for them, and God was still with them. So, yeah, that's just my thoughts on that.
Okay, Claude, right behind you.
Well, just a thought. Maybe he's demonstrating his humbleness because he's not saying, "Oh, I'm just great. I did all those things right." No, he didn't do that. He humbled himself.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. But the difficulty I have is then why make the evil comment? Because I think that he's saying, hey, I'm not as old as my parents. Like, yes, I definitely see you there. But I'm wondering about, the evil part. Like, few and evil have been the days of your servant. Go ahead.
Well, he thought he lost his son, which is probably the hardest thing a parent can experience.
Mm-hmm.
And for many years, he thought Joseph was dead. So I imagine he spent many years struggling and mourning over that and very sad. And it was kind of an evil thing that the brothers did to Joseph. So I think maybe that's where the evil comes in.
Okay. All right. Let's go back to Claude because I think he wants to respond to what I said, and then we'll come to Matt, and then we'll... Hurry, Joey. Go, go, go. Thanks.
So having sat under prosperity teaching a long time ago, I think this is a great statement showing that here's Jacob, okay? A very godly man, but still bad things happen to him. Mm-hmm. So to me, I see this as a response to those people who say, well, if you do this and this, have more faith, nothing bad will happen to you. Well, right there is saying, no, things will still happen to you. Because the rain falls on the just and unjust alike.
Okay. All right. Okay. Go
Could
ahead.
it be because evil entered into this world? And, it's just a consequence of just our fallen state?
Yeah, so I think, as far as like the fact that he encounters evil is not because it's not God's fault, but it's just, hey, this is life. This is the way things are. Okay. All right. Matt.
I think we also have to remember the earlier part of Yaakov's life in which he did many deceitful, many, I don't know if you would classify them as evil, but, thinking back into the, his desire for his brother's birthright and through the deception with his mother, taking that birthright. And then if you look at his encounter, his relationship with Rachel, he desired Rachel, right? And that was something that he wanted. Don't even know if it was necessarily something that God wanted for him in that way, but he saw her, she looked good, he wanted her, so he decided to spend all this time, working for Laban. And then after the fact, when it was time to go, he deceived Laban with the breeding of the sheep in such a way that he could, garner all these things for himself. And so, it wasn't until he wrestled with God and he had, I kind of consider that to be like, this is the war of the spirit and the flesh. And finally the spirit won out, right? And that's when he was changed. That's when he had this major transition point in his life, going from being mostly self-serving to now, going beyond that, crossing over and being led by the Spirit throughout the latter half of his life. And I'm pretty sure at some point it mentions that his eyes grew dim, or his eyes grew weak in the later.
That was Isaac.
Oh, that was Isaac. It wasn't Jacob as well? In the latter years of his life?
Well, he could. You're right. When he's on the bed, he has Yosef bring his grandkids, and he.
Right.
You're correct.
Right.
Yep.
Yes. Anyway.
So, there's a lot there.
There's much there.
Okay, so I think one of the you brought up, okay, he had a he was deceiving, right? I wish we would have had this that week. I think the last 2 or 3 years we've landed on that in a discussion week here. So I think I can push back on you, and I know that it's not going to be too strenuous. So so I think that yes, that Jacob deceived his father. I think that was a very difficult situation because he either disobeys his mother, which he's supposed to honor his father and his mother. Also, his brother was stealing the birthright because, remember, he despised his birthright. He sold it to his brother, to Jacob. So Jacob was really just getting what was rightfully his, where Esau would have taken it by deceit from his father. And we have also a lack of communication, apparently, between Isaac and Rebekah. And so it's like he was in Jacob was in a very rough place. He protests. He's like, I don't want to deceive my father. And besides, what if he finds out? And his mom's like, this. And so, and that was arguably God's will for, which kind of throws a difficult situation where is doing the right thing always the right thing, or is there what do you sometimes have to get your hands dirty? Okay, yes. Was it wrong of him to desire his brother's birthright in the first place? Well, he did because he bargained for it. You wouldn't bargain for something you didn't want. Yeah. So was it wrong for him to desire his brother's birthright? I don't know. It could have been. So here's the thing. He was his mother's son. Esau was his father's son. And it could have been all that we can do is speculate, right? But I would speculate that his mom had told him, hey, you're the one that's supposed to get this. And so he's like, how's that going to happen? And then his brother comes in, brute, just comes down, right? Like, give me some of that red stuff. Well, what's it worth to you? Oh, what good is a birthright if I'm dead? Right? So what does it say? Right? He sits, he eats, he leaves. Like, brute. Ugh. Get out of here. Right? So we have one son who valued it and one who didn't, right? So the one who valued it ended up with it, which God said in the first place was going to happen. Okay. So, however, he's in a very rough place. And then he gets into more of a rough place when his brother finds out. He's like, I'm going to kill you, which is how we got into this spot in the first place, because he's running for his life. And then he comes, and hopefully everybody already read the Parsha, I don't know, but then he comes to Haran, and he meets the folks, and he's like, hey, have you heard of Laban? Oh, yeah, he's right over here, and here comes his daughter. He's like, whoa, hey, I'm supposed to be here to meet you. Oh, and you are good looking, right? Let me move this big rock for you, right? And so he's like, this is great. Things are finally going my way, okay? And so he goes, and Laban sees him coming. Now, last time Laban saw somebody from Abraham's family, it was the servant with 10 camels loaded down with gold and frankincense and all kinds of amazing stuff. And they send he sends his sister off with them. And okay. And so now here he sees Jacob. Where are the camels, bro? Okay, so there's a in the Midrash it says that he saw, like, well, he doesn't have any, like, I'm going to paraphrase it, but he sees him coming, he's like, oh my goodness, he doesn't have, where did all the camels, where's all the, maybe, I know, he changed it to money and it's in his so that's why Laban hugs him to see, oh, it must be, nope, nothing there, right? And so then Laban, then he says he stays with Laban for a month. Apparently he's been working this month because, he's earning his keep or whatever. And Laban's like, hey, just because we're relatives doesn't mean you should serve me for nothing. But he hasn't been compensating Jacob this whole time. And so then he's like, he's like, well, what do you want? Well, your younger daughter's really nice, right? Okay, 7 years, sounds good. And then he's deceived. And then he gets what is that his father-in-law is, oh, yes, who's deceiving him. We don't do that here. And so then he gets his other wife, right? The one he wanted. And now the sisters are fighting. And one of them is getting children and the other one isn't, and the one who's not is saying, hey, I wish that basically my life isn't anything if you don't give me kids. I worked for 14 years for you. What? What do you mean? Okay, so think of how hurtful that is. And is this a love triangle where everybody's desires for everybody else, right? And some of it's not sexual, right? It's competitive, but where nobody's getting what they want, and so he's got these two sister wives that are fighting. He's always out in the field. He's like, I do not want to be at home. He's just out there, right? Yes. He's like, the sheep need me, the goats need me. One of the hands, they need something, I'll be back. And so, through all this, his father-in-law, is constantly, who's also his uncle, is constantly changing his wages and all this kind of stuff, and he's struggling. And we find out that what he's doing with the sheep, God told him to do, right? So we can't ascribe a nefarious motive there. So, but I'm going through all this, he's always, when is he not in a hard place? All right. Okay, Claude. He's been dying to say something over here.
You sow what you reap. And the thing is that as you're talking, I think that's something I'm learning more also, is that when I was younger and a believer, I was doing some stuff that I shouldn't have been doing. I was planting my seed. And now, in my later years, I'm finding out, why is this all going on? What's going on? Well, I sowed something, and now I'm reaping it.
Yeah, there's a lot of deception that's going on here, right? And so Yaakov deceives, and then he's deceived, and he's deceived, and he's deceived, and he's deceived. Somebody mentioned his son. Hey, tell me if is this your son's coat with all the blood on it, right? He's just being deceived constantly, and he just doesn't have. He's always in a hard place. He never has any peace.
I just have a question. It's just something that I've kind of always pondered, because you reap what you sow. We all do. The Bible says that God won't be mocked. But I kind of think I think back in my life, and myself, of course, there's 1.5 million things that I've done. I definitely can understand evil happening throughout most of my life. And then you think about what, for me anyway, what happened first, the chicken or the egg, right? But it's I've always pondered, how long do you reap what you sow? Where is there, God, please don't remember the sins of my youth. How many times, how long does that, I get it's perpetual every time you know what I'm saying, do something, right? There's natural consequences. But there's a time when, you just look back and you're like, how long? How long does this law of reaping what you sow continue?
Okay, so I'm just kind of going back in time a little bit when they were born, Rachel, right? And so she was told that the younger would serve the older. I mean, the older would serve the younger. So I'm pretty sure that she told Isaac this. And Isaac should have been telling his sons, hey, by the way, this one's going to get the blessing. And I think if he did that, there would have been upfront, knowingly, there would have been a lot less agitation between the brothers at this time. There wouldn't have had been any deception at all from the wife, the mother, telling to do this kind of thing. So things step down, they just kind of trickle, right? So that's why I'm thinking that, there's God was going to make this happen no matter what. So they had choices to make, but Isaac decided to go with tradition instead of what he knew was supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think we don't know if he knew or not, right? So
Right.
The idea is that Rebecca had gone to Mount Moriah without him. That's where she sought God, and that's where he spoke to her. And so he knows, like, hey, she went to see God, and she comes back, and everything's good. Perfect. Like, they may not have, should they have communicated? 100%. It just doesn't seem like that happened. Right. Okay, so going back to, reaping what you sow, how long, like, when does the cycle end, and that sort of thing. I think that a lot of this has to do with, reaping what we sow and all that kind of stuff, but we have to think of, like, when did that sort of thing enter, right? And it seems like that sort of thing came about as a result of sin entering the world. And so all of us who have been born of Adam have been under that same, I'm not necessarily like referencing like original sin or something, but I'm saying that as it's our nature as human beings to strive, to struggle, to do the wrong thing, go the wrong direction, all that kind of stuff. And so there's a in Galatians he talks about being those who are under the law and not fulfilling it are under a curse, right? And where am I going? I'll get somewhere with this here. Okay, so verse 10, Galatians 3:10, for all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse, for it is written, curses everyone who does not abide by all things written in the book of the law and do them. Now it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law, for the righteous shall live by faith. But the law is not of faith, rather the one who does them shall live by them. Okay, that's from Leviticus 18, I believe. Messiah redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. As it is written, curses everyone who is hanged on the tree, so that in Messiah Yeshua the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles, so that we might receive the promised Spirit through faith. Okay. So, yes, we reap what we sow. Yes, there's all of this sort of thing, and there is the cycle. Also, I would say that if there's an ongoing cycle like that, you could say that that's a curse, right? That it keeps happening. I'm stretching this a little bit. Okay, I'm acknowledging like this is not verbatim what the scripture says and what it means. But okay. This is the discussion part. And so the thing is that Yeshua the Messiah can break every curse for us, and in him the curse is broken. Now, why do things still happen? I think it goes back to your previous comment about living in a world that is like this is part of the nature of life is difficulty and hard things. one of the commentaries I was reading was talking about God's promise here to Yaakov, because we still haven't gotten past the first few paragraphs here of the Parsha. But God says, I'll promise to be with you wherever you go, and I'll bring you back here, and I won't leave until I fulfill my promise to you. And so then the question is, can we expect God to intervene on our behalf? Do we expect that? And should we? And I think that God's promise, right? There's that the name of God here is Hamakon, right? The place. He's our place. He's our refuge. He's with us. And Yeshua says, I'm with you even to the end of the age, right? The promises of God isn't that we would have an easy life. I was talking to my wife about this last night, talking about the struggles that we and friends of ours and like firsthand knowledge that we have, like, and it's not like unrighteous people that that things are happening to, and yet God's promise is to be with us through it, not that we don't have to go through it. Right, in Isaiah, he says, when you walk through the water, I'll be there, or through the fire, I'll be with you, and through the floods, they won't overwhelm you. Right? He says, fear not, because I'm with you. He doesn't say, hey, it's all gravy, baby. It'll be fine. No worry. Right? Like, he's saying, look, it's going to happen, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be painful, and I'm going to be with you. Okay. Richard.
I'm particularly touched by the fact that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies those he calls. And this is indicative of Jacob. Jacob was a cheater. And throughout the Bible, we have examples of cheaters and people who are tempted, adulterers, drunks, gossipers, worriers, doubters, those who are impatient, those who stuttered. I mean, the Bible is replete with people that he called who were imperfect. And for me, personally, that's a great deal of hope. I'm imperfect, and we all are. But when we see what God has done in these other people's lives, we can say, he can do that for me too. And he can do that for you as well. So we can minister that to those who are suffering, to those who are doubting, to those who are insecure about their place in the world, that their place in God is pretty well set, or it can be.
Just going to backtrack just a little bit again to Esau. Personally, I think that if the boys were told growing up who was going to get the blessing, especially how seemingly easily upset Esau gets, I feel like, because it describes Esau as an outdoorsman and Jacob a more quiet, mellow man. I feel like if Esau was raised being told, hey, your younger brother's going to get the blessing, not you, I feel like he would have thought Jacob inferior, and maybe up to the point when the blessing would have been given, I feel like he probably would have tried to kill Jacob, because he tried to kill him afterwards.
Potentially, yeah. I think it certainly would have. I think it would have front-loaded the conflict, right? So at the beginning of their lives, and at the beginning, but again, you would have had more time. I mean, we can only speculate, right? But yeah. The way that it worked out, simultaneously, seems like not the best way it could have gone, and according to God's will. Like, what do we do with that? We speculate.
I just had a thought. I've never thought about this before, but if Isaac and Rebecca would have had a conversation about this, the boys were twins. They didn't necessarily need to know the truth of which one was born first. Just saying.
All right. Okay. So, okay, so this has been a good conversation. Let's continue reading. So, won't leave you till I've done what I've promised. Genesis 28:16. Yaakov awoke from his sleep and said, "Truly Adonai is in this place, and I didn't know it." Then he became afraid and said, "This place is fearsome." Awesome. This has to be the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Yaakov got up early in the morning, took the stone he had put under his head, set up as a standing stone, poured olive oil on its top, named the place Beit El, the house of God, Bethel. But the town had originally been called Luz. Yaakov took this vow: "If God will be with me and will guard me on this road that I am traveling, give me bread to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return to my father's house in peace, then Adonai will be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a standing stone will be God's house, and of everything you give me, I will faithfully return 1/10 to you." Okay. Probably need to read on before we start conversation, but I'm just going to say, I don't think that he was wrong with this being the house of God and the gate of heaven, but it was a mistake to think that this is the place where God is, right? Like his concept at that point is, along with the rest of the world, at that point is like, hey, there's a God of this place, and there's a God of that place, and there's a God of the mountains, and there's a God of the valleys, and there's a God of the streams, and there's a God of the sky, and there's, right? And so he's thinking, well, this is it. This is where this God, I just happened, quote unquote, to stay at his place overnight. But really, God had sought him out, and then the other thing is, first of all, God already said he was going to bless him, but then he says, "If you, then I," right? And generally, we want to be careful with what we're bargaining with God as, because often it can turn into somebody is. The way that I read in one commentary was somebody being in the employ of someone else, right? I own a business, and I tell my employees, if you come at this time and do this work and leave at this time, I'll pay you this much. And it's kind of like, well, God, if you do this and this and this, then I'll give you this, right? So then God is, or, hey, if I do this and this and this, will you do this for me, right? Okay, well, now we're hiring ourselves out to God in some way. And so we do see sometimes in Scripture, both here as well, the other one is with Gideon. Hey, if you do this, then I'll do that. But just recognize that this shouldn't be our modus operandi, right? This should not be the way that we are working constantly with God. But anyway, God is patient with us. All right, so I'm going to continue on. All right, chapter 29. Continuing his journey, Yaakov came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in a field, and there were 3 flocks of sheep lying there next to it, because they watered the sheep from that well. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and only when all the flocks had gathered would they roll the stone away from the opening of the well and water the sheep. Then they would put the same stone back in its place on the well's opening. Yaakov said to them, "My brothers, where are you from?" They answered, "We're from Haran." He asked them, "Do you know Lavan, the grandson of Nahor, son of Nahor?" They said, "We do." He asked them, "Are things going well with him?" "Yes," they answered. "And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." He said, "Look, there's still plenty of daylight left, and it isn't time to bring the animals home. So water the sheep and go and put them out to pasture." They said, "We can't, not until all the flocks have been gathered together." And they roll the stone away from the opening of the well. That's when we water the sheep. Buddy. They knew what was going on. You're like, we like looking at her too. All right. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep because she took care of them. She was a shepherdess. When Yaakov saw Rachel, the daughter of Lavan, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Lavan, his mother's brother, Yaakov went up, rolled the stone away from the opening of the well, and watered the flock of Lavan, his mother's brother. Yaakov kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Yaakov told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rivka's son. She ran and told her father. When Laban heard the news of Yaakov, his sister's son, he ran to meet him, hugged him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. Yaakov told Laban all that had happened. Laban said to him, "You indeed are my own flesh and blood." After Yaakov had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Why should you work for me for nothing, just because you're my relative? Tell me how much I should pay you." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak or smooth, but Rachel was good-looking with beautiful features. Yaakov had fallen in love with Rachel and said, "I will work for you 7 years in exchange for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban answered, "Better that I give her to you than someone else to stay with me." So Yaakov worked 7 years for Rachel, and it seemed only a few days to him because he was so much in love with her. Okay. Pause, comments, thoughts? Crickets? Okay. All right, Lisa.
Okay, so my question is, so Laban tells him, yeah, you can have her work for, this amount of time, but that was not their custom. So why would he tell him, sure, you can have her, when he knew he wasn't going to give her to him?
Because he's a scoundrel.
Oh. Well, I guess I'm looking for so he just was a scoundrel. That's just what it was. There was no, I'm looking for some deeper meaning, I guess. Why would he say that?
So what we know of Laban and the way that he appears to us pretty much every time is, yeah, he's from the same family as Rebecca, but and technically from Abraham's family, from his uncle and all this kind of stuff. So character doesn't really transfer and all this kind of stuff. And instead of coming out and saying, "Hey, you know what? You're doing great. Thank you so much. Let me pay you this much," right? He's in negotiations. There's when you Laban's part to say, and I mean 7 years. So So Jacob doesn't have a dowry, right? He doesn't have the money to give him, and so he's like, "Hey, she is so beautiful. I will work for you for 7 years," right? I imagine this is way beyond what Laban expected or thought he would ever be able to get. And so he's like, "Yeah, 7 years, all right." And so, and then he's not even excited to give her to him. He's like, better than one of these other unrelated blokes. He's not like, "Oh yeah, keep it in the family. This is great." No, he's like, better you than someone else, I guess. You know what I'm saying? It's very muted, just yeah. In fact, later when Jacob is going to leave, the words that he's talking to Rebecca and Leah, and he's like, "Hey, let's go. Your father doesn't look at me with favor anymore. I just, he's changed my wages a ton of times, all this kind of stuff." And they basically we're basically chattel to him. We're just property to be bought and sold, and we already have all we're ever going to get from him anyway. Yeah, let's go. So the picture that we have of Laban and how he interacts with people and how he treats his own family even is not amazing. So,
can I make a quick comment? Yeah. It just occurred to me as I was thinking about it. So Rachel was old enough to ask her hand in marriage before he worked for 7 years for her. So she had to have been at least 14, probably. 7 years later, and Leah is older than Rachel. So it's possible that Laban's thought was, well, by the time those 7 years are up, Leah will have been married off anyways. I don't really need to go that direction because I mean, he could have volunteered the information like, yeah, but Leah needs to be married first, so we need to work to find her a husband over the next 7 years. Like, that would have been, probably a good idea. But Leah was probably considered like an old maid by the time Rachel was due to get married. Because if she was older than Rachel, she was probably at least 16, which would have made her like 23. In those days, that was probably pretty old to be settling down. So there may have been just, like, I've never thought about it in that dynamic before, that she maybe had been passed over. Like, we don't know her whole story. There's probably a lot of hurt in her story as well.
Yes. Yeah, and we can be a little generous with Laban and give him the benefit of the doubt. Yes. So that's, absolutely, I would agree with that. That could be a valid thing. Well, because also, such a long time, right? And she's older. And also, it doesn't necessarily mean that she didn't see well or that she was ugly or whatever. It could have been that it could have been, hey, she had smooth eyes, she had nice eyes, but Rachel was, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean to be contrasting ugly and beautiful. It could have been, pretty and really beautiful also. So maybe Laban was thinking, hey, but by the time that comes, she'll be long married. Done.
My Orthodox friend, Jewish Orthodox friend, told me that a perspective on this, that because you would think in the story you would hear Rachel screaming and yelling in the tent, like, no, it's my night, what are you doing? Where's the duct tape to shut her up, right? That actually, because first of all, that the older should have been married first, but that, again, we don't know the whole story, but older, to carry on. But that Rachel had compassion on her sister Leah, and that she went along with this in order to have this compassion for her sister, knowing that at least she would be under the covering of a husband.
Yes. Because
we also have absolutely no record that Rachel liked Jacob. She wanted kids from him, but we don't have any record that she was attracted to him. We had this conversation last night. I was like, how is she not interrupting this wedding going, hey, that's not me, unless she wasn't actually interested in marrying him to begin with. And she's like, yeah, Leah, you can have him. I mean, it could just be compassion and sympathy. It could go either way. It is definitely something interesting to think about.
All right. So, Yaakov, verse 21. And we're going to try to get to the end of this chapter, and then we're getting close to the end here. Okay. Yaakov said to Lavan, give me my wife since my time is finished so I can start living with her. Basically, he's like, hey, I just want to, do the thing. Let's go. Laban gathered all the men of the place and gave a banquet. In the evening, he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Yaakov, and he went in and slept with her. Laban also gave a slave girl, Zilpah, to his daughter Leah as her slave girl. In the morning, Yaakov saw that he was with Leah, and he said to Laban, what kind of thing is this that you've done to me? Didn't I work for you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me? Laban answered, in our place, that isn't how it's done, to give the younger daughter before the firstborn. Finish the marriage week of this one, and I'll give you the other one also in exchange for the work you will do for me during yet another 7 years. Again, very shrewd on his part. Yaakov agreed to this, so he finished her week, and Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife. Laban also gave to his daughter Rachel his slave girl Bilhah as her slave girl. So not only did Yaakov go in and sleep with Rachel, but he also loved Rachel more than Leah. Then he served Laban another 7 years. I just want to make a comment. The question is always, how did the fool not know he had the wrong woman? I shouldn't call him a fool. I apologize. I was wrong. He's not a fool. He was most likely drunk, and it was pitch black. And Leah also wanted to be married, so she done kept her mouth shut, right? So I'm just saying there's legitimate ways that this could have gone, that it wasn't like Jacob was, absent-minded or just not paying attention or something, right? Okay. Adonai saw that Leah was unloved, so he made her fertile while Rachel remained childless. Leah conceived and gave birth to a son whom she named Reuben, a son. For she said, "It is because Adonai has seen how humiliated I have been, but now my husband will love me." Ooh. She conceived again, gave birth to a son, and said, "It is because Adonai has heard that I am unloved. Therefore he has given me this son also." So we named him Shimon, which is hearing. Once more she conceived and had a son, and she said, "Now this time my husband will be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Therefore she named him Levi, right, or joining. She conceived yet again, had a son, and said, "This time I will praise Adonai." Therefore she named him Yehuda, Judah, praise. Then she stopped having children. Poor Leah. All right. Okay, anything else we want to comment on this before we move on? All right. Okay, go ahead.
So I think early on in that last passage you read, it said something about God making Rachel barren or something like that.
No, it said that God opened a misconception that's very common here, and that is that Jacob didn't get Rachel until the second 7 years, right, for 14 years. But what happened was after 7 years he gets Leah, and then he gets Rachel, and then he has to work for 7 more years. So he's married to both of them, and then it's like during this time is where we're seeing this next spat of competition playing out between them with having kids, and this time when with the mandrakes and where Rachel's like, "Hey, give me talking to Leah and saying, give me the mandrakes that that Reuben found, and because that was like an omen, basically. It was like a good luck charm for getting pregnant, right? And so anyway, so it was so they were both married to him, but the difference was that Leah was in some translations says that when God said that she was hated, right? That it wasn't just that she was unloved. And so then with that situation of the mandrakes, God has mercy on her and gives her a child, and there's no love there, right? Literally, she goes out to when Jacob's coming back, she's like, "Hey, I hired you for the night. Come on." It's not like making love like between a husband and wife. It's like this crass, hired, literally, we'll just say hired for the night. Come on. And so anyway, it was just a terrible situation all around. But yeah, so God did not make Rebecca or Rivka Rachel. What am I saying? But he did not make her barren. Any other thoughts? Okay. All right, we've got 2. Okay, Hannah and then Sarah, and then I think we'll be done.
I knew I should have said this when we were on it in the very beginning, and I think you kind of alluded to it, but it's true, we reap what we sow. But sometimes things happen to us that we didn't reap. And that's a really important point, because we just need to be compassionate. And there's a lot of people going through things that aren't going through them because of some sin in their lives in the past. Just want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's kind of what we're saying is that, we see, okay, I'm just going on a whole other tangent related to that. But we see that Yeshua correcting that line of thought to the disciples, right? This master who was born blind, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind, right? And Yeshua's like, no, not at all. That the glory of God would be revealed through him, right? So that guy still had to endure blindness his whole life to that point. So, yeah, that's a good point.
This story always brings comfort to me that I'm not the only person that comes from a dysfunctional family.
Right? Right? And one of the things that I appreciate about Scripture is that God doesn't try to sugarcoat things. And he doesn't, to the point made earlier, he doesn't just pick perfect people and, hey, great, now this guy I can use because he's got it together. That God can redeem and restore and use broken people, like Rachel and Leah and Jacob and Isaac and Abraham and Bill and Bud and Matt and all of us, like Mark, lest I seem like that I'm out of touch. And so I think this is one of the great, as you said, comforts of Scripture, is that God isn't looking for perfect people, but he's looking for people who will fear him, who will love him, who will obey his commandments, who will walk humbly with him, that will honor him, that will, we can't honor God if we don't honor other people, if we don't, have good relationships and love God and love your neighbor as yourself, right? Those are the two commandments, and so everything hinges on those two things. And so, so I'm very encouraged, and Jacob's striving, right? This is what leads to part of the redemptive portion of his story, right? Where he's striving with who he identifies as God in the end of chapter 32. This is next week's Parsha. And they strive all night. And so this stranger that he's wrestling with says, let me go because it's daybreak, and it was all night that they were wrestling and fighting, and says, Yaakov replied, I won't let you go unless you bless me. Right? He knew something was going on. He knew this was God. And he says, the man asked, what is your name? He answered, Yaakov. Then he said, from now on, you will no longer be called Yaakov, but Israel, because you have shown your strength to both God and man and have prevailed. Right? You've wrestled with God and man and prevailed. And so he receives God's blessing, but it's only through strife. And does it always have to be through strife? Not necessarily. But my point is that we have so many examples of this through Scripture that we shouldn't be caught off guard when difficult things happen. Right? What does Peter say? Don't be surprised, my beloved, at the fiery trials. Right? That you're enduring, because maybe it was Jacob. Right? That they produce, ultimately produce patience. They produce faithfulness towards God. And so, as we have this example of Yaakov, as well as Rachel and Leah, like we see this progression where we just ended with Leah, where she's finally accepting this and going and saying, God will be with me, right? And I will praise Adonai. And she accepts. She's a wonderful example, I think, for us. That she accepts where she is and says, God's promise wasn't for a problem-free life, but God's promise is that he'll be with me, and so I'm going to praise him as he's with us.